On this episode of China Uncensored, does the CCP support ethnic cleansing in Myanmar? Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Myanmar, the country formerly and sometimes still known as Burma. It's one of the 14 countries that share a border with China. It's also one of dozens of countries that share economic development projects with China. Myanmar is part of China's One Belt, One Road initiative, which has nothing to do with how high Xi Jinping's pants are. The One Belt, One Road initiative is actually Xi Jinping's multi-trillion-dollar plan to build giant infrastructure projects in countries around the world, mostly docks, airports, and train lines, that sort of thing. The countries pay for it using money that is often borrowed from Chinese banks, and then they will either pay it back if the project is a success, or be in debt to China forever. You know, win-win, just like my student loans. The Chinese state-owned conglomerate CITIC is behind a huge set of infrastructure projects in Myanmar. They've recently completed a deep water port in the Bay of Bengal, plus oil and gas pipelines connecting that port with China. All this development has cost Myanmar more than $10 billion. Most of the construction has taken place in Myanmar's Rakhine state, which is the poorest state in Myanmar. And it's full of ethnic minorities known as Rohingyas. But there's been some problems. Since August, more than 480,000 Rohingyas have fled the region, most of them to neighboring Bangladesh. So why are they fleeing? Well, it's complicated, but recently Rohingyas have been facing persecution from a group of violent religious extremists, Buddhist monks. It turns out, regardless of race, religion, or creed, all people have the capacity to be huge jerks. It's what binds us all together. Myanmar is a predominantly Buddhist country, and it has seen a rise of extremism following the end of 50 years of authoritarian rule by a military junta in 2011. And radical Buddhist monks have incited killings of Myanmar's Muslim minority, the Rohingyas. Yes, you heard that right. Sword-wielding Buddhist extremists are killing impoverished Muslim minorities, including women and children. According to the International Crisis Group, Myanmar has been troubled by an upsurge in extreme Buddhist nationalism, anti-Muslim hate speech, and deadly communal violence. This tension between Buddhists and Muslims in Myanmar goes back decades. Only 4% of the country is Muslim, and the Rohingyas were heavily persecuted by the ruling military junta too back when it was in power. But even after Myanmar's transition to sort of democracy, the issues continued. 2 years ago, President Obama condemned the discrimination against the Rohingyas, even as he praised Myanmar's budding democracy. But there's an ongoing cycle of violence that leaves no one blameless. For example, last October, Islamic extremists killed 9 police. That led to a military crackdown on the entire Rakhine state that ended only in February. The United Nations said the military may have committed crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing. Then in August, a group of Rohingya Muslims again attacked police, and the army cracked down on Rohingyas again in a big way. And so did the Buddhists. More than 1,000 Rohingyas have been killed in recent months, and as I mentioned, more than 480,000 have fled to Bangladesh, which, by the way, doesn't really want them either, but they are letting them in. More than 60% of the refugees are children. And once again, the United Nations is calling the violence in Myanmar ethnic cleansing.
But the situation remains, or seems, a textbook example of ethnic cleansing.
Which, if you think about it, ethnic cleansing is a pretty weird euphemism. The U.S. Trump administration has also condemned the violence against Rohingya Muslims.
President Trump and I also call on this Security Council and the United Nations to take strong and swift action to bring this crisis to an end and give hope and help to the Rohingya people in their hour of need.
So just a quick recap. Violent extremist Buddhists and the Myanmar army have been attacking Muslims. And now the Trump administration is defending the persecuted Muslims. I'm not sure I know what's going on anymore. Is there any firm reality I can grab onto? What's that, Shelley? Good. The Chinese regime endorses the crackdown. And they're saying the rest of the world should just butt out of Myanmar's internal affairs. Good old predictable Chinese Communist Party, you are my rock in this turbulent world. Once again, the Chinese regime is blocking international efforts to butt into the affairs of another country, like it did with the violence in Sudan, or the nuclear weapons development in North Korea for years, or any of a dozen other countries. And it's a pretty common strategy of the Chinese regime, because while the rest of the world wags its collective finger, the Chinese Communist Party is there to be like, don't worry, what you do behind closed doors is your own business. And when it comes to making large-scale infrastructure deals, just remember who's got your back in the UN. As the American interest puts it, unencumbered by considerations of values, Beijing can make friends with all kinds of unsavory regimes that the United States or the European Union prefers to scold or sanction. And China has big political interests in Myanmar. For one, China is battling the United States over influence there. Following the end of the military junta in 2011, the U.S. eased up on sanctions that had been in place for 2 decades. Obama became the first U.S. president to visit Myanmar while in office, and the first U.S. president to hug Myanmar's new leader while in office. That was a bit worrisome to Beijing, especially the hugging part. Xi Jinping only got a handshake. The last thing the Chinese regime wants is another U.S. ally right on its border. The solution? Drive a wedge between the U.S. and Myanmar. China has worked to build ties with Myanmar for economic reasons too, like easy access to the Indian Ocean without the trouble of going around the Malaysian peninsula. That's not to say the Chinese regime is unconcerned about violence in Myanmar. I mean, it might interfere with that oil pipeline. Now, China did back a UN Security Council resolution expressing concern about the violence. Oh yes, so much concern. But China then blocked harsher language from being added to it. To the West, the CCP acts like it's playing along while assuring Myanmar that it won't really put the screws on them. And let's not forget, if China really were to criticize Myanmar for its treatment of the Muslim minority, it would sound a bit hypocritical considering the CCP's treatment of its own Muslim minority, the Uyghurs. And gosh, the CCP would hate to sound hypocritical on something. But the Trump administration doesn't really want to be too harsh on the Myanmar government either, and supports the no sanctions policy started by Obama. That's because the U.S. has supported the democratic developments in Myanmar under its new leader. And the U.S.'s overriding concern is to keep Myanmar as a U.S. ally and not alienate them, because that might push them closer to the Chinese regime. So to sum up, in Myanmar, violent Buddhist extremists are persecuting Muslims and forcing them to flee the country. Trump actually agrees with Obama that persecuting these Muslims is wrong and should stop. But the U.S. government also doesn't want to push too hard and alienate Myanmar's government. And finally, the Chinese regime agrees that the U.S. shouldn't interfere, since that would be against China's interests, and also no country should interfere with another country's internal affairs. Unless we're talking about China trying to interfere in the internal affairs of New Zealand, but that's a whole nother episode. Thanks for watching China Uncensored. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. See you next time. If you love learning about persecution, and who doesn't, you should check out our website, ChinaUncensored.tv. We cover so many groups getting persecuted, you'll love it. I know you will. ChinaUncensored.tv.